Okay, welcome back then. It is late June 1875. You'll know by now that I took a bit of a kind of summer break, an impromptu summer break from the campaign. It is a long game, so it's worth taking your time with, and in sort of previous grand campaigns that I've played with Pride of Nations, I have sometimes taken a couple of months away for one reason or another. It's a long game. So there's no sort of point rushing it. Apologies if this has kind of impeded your enjoyment of the campaign diary, which will continue to be uploaded and will be uploaded right until 1920, until the end of the grand campaign. Someone did note in the kind of comments that the frequency of uploads had sort of declined prior to my having taken a break. That's not really related. I still am playing a multiplayer grand campaign of Pride of Nations, right? Playing as Russia, which is generally fairly uneventful, but is punctuated by periods of crisis and warfare, and there was quite a lot going on. That didn't really result in me spending a lot of time playing the game, but a lot of kind of gaming time was taken up on Slack, where I was kind of engaging in plotting and intriguing and discussing and planning with allies and stuff like that, and one crisis rolled into another, and it ended up kind of making my single-player grand campaign a little bit more sparse than it otherwise would have been. But as I say, this campaign is going to go right to the end. I've got a few ideas about this campaign. I've not been not thinking about it. Throughout the summer, I've kind of been conjuring up a few ideas. I've got a few plans. What I might do is when I pass turn, is to kind of keep you on, because I usually put you on pause, keep you on and maybe go through those ideas with you. I've not settled on any kind of plan yet, but maybe if if you're following the campaign and you're interested, perhaps some feedback might sort of sway me one way or the other. But late June is actually where we left off about 2.5-3 months ago, in real life that is, and it's really the beginning of what we intend to be a kind of the penultimate Ottoman-Austrian war. The meta of this grand campaign since 1860, about 15 years, has been kind of running warfare with the Austrians on and off. That's not unrealistic. You know, I said right at the beginning 1850 that a resurgent Ottoman Empire would likely be going to, toe-to-toe with Austria and the Balkans, as was the case when the Ottoman Empire was at the apogee of its imperial power. So this much was expected. The Russian piece was not. Russia has been kind of locked into a war in Scandinavia, which seems to be kind of ongoing. I think I might have overshot a bit there. It seems to be a war with Austria and Prussia against Scandinavia. That might have the result in kind of not enabling either Russia or Prussia to get the war score necessary to press for a satisfactory peace. That's my hunch, which means that the war just kind of languishes on, because the war score becomes spread if you have multiple kind of powers at war with the same one. So, yeah, I mean, like, don't get me wrong, it's been good. It's been positive for us, and this is probably one of the best starts I've ever had is the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire is my go-to faction in grand campaigns in Pride of Nations. Of all of my Pride of Nations games, easily 2/3 of them are as the Ottomans. This leaves some gap in my knowledge with regard to other features of the game, which I'm actually starting to realize when I'm playing as Russia just now, that there are some things which I'm just not that familiar with because they don't really exist with the Ottomans. The Ottomans have a fairly limited kind of suite of options, for example, whether it's government options or military options, demographic options, and this kind of thing, which is quite interesting. So I'm actually, despite having played the game for over 10 years now, I'm actually discovering things as Russia. The other kind of factions I typically play for a few years, or I set myself a 5-year or maybe a 10-year game. The Ottomans I tend to like to play to the very end, So this has been as good a start as I've ever experienced. The Ottoman campaign that I played before this one, the one that I depicted, which was a few years before I started this campaign, I got absolutely mauled. I played it with the same settings, and I got kind of mauled by the Austrians in one of the wars, and I was never really able to recover from it. And yeah, it was. The weird thing is, I could have just given up Bosnia, but just didn't, and it kind of ruined the game for me. I made a mistake, and it was bad enough that I couldn't live with it. But I kind of regretted quitting it. And so I thought, well, a part of the campaign diary was if I emotionally blackmail myself into staying the course, so if the game goes against me, I have to live with the consequences, then that might make for an interesting game, so I'm going to do just that. The war plan, if you recall, and it was some time ago, so to refresh your memory, was to spend the opening part of the war being, for the most part, fairly defensive. The Austrian army is large. The Austrians have a kind of a feature where they can kind of like mobilize, you know, their sort of working age male population, which significantly expands their manpower pool. A lot of them are reserve units. I learned in my multiplayer game that reserve units, if they come from a different nationality, so for example like an ethnically Hungarian reserve unit, really ideally they have to have a Hungarian general. If they have an Austrian general, they get a command penalty, in much the same way as, for example, when we have like volunteer formations, i.e. captured headquarters units that we then pad out with prisoners of war and press into service as military units. I'm not sure if I have any left. I think I've destroyed most of them. Yeah, I think I have. But with those units, you get a huge command penalty, unless I happen to have a German or, you know, which I don't. I mean, all the Ottoman officers, even if they're not actually ethnically Turkish or Arabic, they're considered Ottoman officers. They don't give you any kind of bonus for other ethnic groups. Which is quite interesting, given this is the Ottoman Empire, and it's pretty sort of multi-ethnic empire, and our army can contain, you know, Bulgarians, Greeks, Serbs, Romanians, and so on. So yeah, but anyway, it's a feature that just doesn't really exist for the Ottomans. I guess maybe it's a balancing thing or something. So the Austrians get this huge mobilization, manpower kind of net, and that really expands the size of their army. And one of the tactics in the last war that we fought with them, which was a war that was a bit touch and go, it kind of almost went against us, is they just rush you in a concentrated area with all those numbers kind of thing. It's a bit like what the Prussians did in the Franco-Prussian War. They got really good concentration with a much larger army, and then sort of launched a sort of, you know, like a focal point, a Schwerpunkt. They launched an attack in a focused area. They managed to kind of roll the French up, trapped them in, I think it was Strasbourg or Metz or somewhere like that, and then that was it. It's kind of game over for the French. So we don't want to fall into that trap, which we almost did in the last war. So we're going to conduct a relatively defensive war whilst conducting localized judicious counter-offensives. So, for example, these moves are the moves that were planned at the end of the last video. We've got the Second Army moving up into kind of Serbia. In terms of Belgrade, Belgrade is actually controlled by the Serbs, so we'll be looking to conduct a siege of Belgrade. They're going to be supported by the 6th Army and the 3rd to the north in Banat, and then we've got the 1st Army marching into Novi Pazar. That is a 12-day march. He won't be there in time to provide support. You'll notice that Mehmed Ali, he's our best offensive commander at this time. He pretty much has stats now that were not dissimilar to the famous kind of Omar Pasha, who was our kind of stellar commander in the early part of this this kind of campaign. Mehmed Ali's pretty much at where he was now in terms of his stats. He's an absolutely first-rate offensive commander. He's developing as a defensive commander. He's got good strategic value, so he's almost always activated, which is great. He conducted a localized offensive in Sarajevo. It was successful, and we're now looking to pull him back because we want to get support from Serbia. We also anticipate the Austrians will launch a counterattack against Hussein Avni's army once he, in theory, clears the district around Belgrade. He'll conduct a siege of Belgrade, but we're relatively sure that the Austrians will try and re-push that position. In the center and the east of the line, even though all of our commands are activated, we're going to look to hold our position for the time being. We don't want to overstretch ourselves. We want to try and get a clear idea, because whilst the Austrians look quite thin here, we had this in the last war, they had significant forces out of view in reserve, sort of concealed in the fog of war, and these were used to great effect to really surprise us, get us in a really dangerous situation more than once. So we've got to hold our position. And the main thing we've got going for us as well is our centralized reserve system. In Adrianople or Edirne, we have 4 corps. These are kind of militia corps, but half of the elements, half of the regiments, have been trained into regular line formations, or not half of them. Half of them in the first 2 corps. The remaining 2 corps have just a couple, 3 in total elements. That will be a continuous, ongoing process, but if we get in a situation where one of our armies becomes badly depleted, we can use our railway system. We've got good integrated railways in the Balkan Peninsula now to rotate corps out. So we can switch corps out from our standing commands, get them back to Edirne, switch them out of these reserve corps in the same turn to push up on rail and join our army. It will require 1 turn only for that army to hold position. The key thing is, is even while it is the case that in some, sometimes in a single turn and a fortnight, a corps can replace almost all of its losses if it's utterly devastated. Usually it will take a month to 6 weeks. But when you have a big influx of fresh raw recruits that drives down the organization, which requires then further time. One way that you can mitigate that is through the use of provost or military policemen, which allow your your teeth arms to recover their organization and cohesion far quicker. But that's really just a mitigating factor. It doesn't stop the kind of reduction in organization and cohesion based on an influx of new recruits. It takes time to drill those recruits. This is 19th century warfare, so training is not going to be highly elaborate. It's going to be marching, it's going to be learning how to use your service weapon, and this kind of thing. And I guess firing and ranks and formations and obeying commands and sort of learning a little bit of command shorthand probably. So it requires a fortnight to a month really for a corps to regain its cohesion organization based on those recruits being kind of properly trained. That's pretty much it. In terms of our moves, they are the moves that we actually planned. I suggested at the end of the last video that I might pass turn, or I might start the video where we left off if I have any new plans. I've not introduced anything new. The only other thing I am going to do is to try and take our new kind of ironclad fleet for a bit of a spin. We left them at in the kind of Gulf of Venice at the top of the Adriatic. We're going to conduct a naval combat patrol of the Adriatic. It's going to be 2 days from where we are, just off the Dalmatian coastline, and we're going to look to try and shell the coastal region, just to see what the effectiveness is, really, of our new ships. This is our kind of naval construction program has borne fruit. It's not complete. But for the most part now, well, in fact, entirely, all of our traditional Age of Sail ships have been replaced by modern ironclads. Even our very early, I think in the video at the time, I mistakenly called them dreadnoughts, where I was kind of half awake. But even our sort of prototype ironclads, they've now been replaced by these coastal squadrons. The prototype ironclads were just very small. They're actually riverine craft. They're now obsolescent. This shows how quick this age is now in terms of developing maritime technologies. It is something we've been anticipating for a long time. So we've replaced the kind of the sort of very early riverine ironclads with proper coastal craft. These are more modern designs. They're just more effective. They've got greater kind of combat values and so on. We have got one sort of scouting squadron. These are going to be corvettes, ironclad corvettes, almost completely construction. In fact, they're really just conducting their sea trials now. And we have a squadron of frigates that are still being constructed. The construction is nearing completion, and then we'll be looking at a period of time for sea trials before they can be added to the main fleet. That is it. That's all of our combat moves. I have looked through the reports. I'm going to have another quick read through just to refamiliarize myself. That said, I have spent a bit of time looking at the game prior to sort of beginning this video. Assets balance looks good. We've got 98% satisfaction, 0 inflation, and we've got really nice private capital sort of yields on a sort of fortnightly basis. Our economy is humming. It's a very productive economy. We are definitely on the map now as a serious industrial power. Our sort of trade balance has kind of been set. We hold back what we want to kind of hold back, exporting surplus agricultural produce. We are holding back, for the most part, manufactured goods for the time being. We're looking to stockpile those. But everything else, beyond what we kind of want to hold back. Coal, even though we've got a lot of coal, you'll remember, we're running a huge coal deficit now. So we have to import a significant amount of coal on the international market to actually sustain this number. The reason we're keeping a really high number is because we basically want a large coal stockpile. We're at a point now where our economy is consuming many times more coal than we really have access to in terms of domestic sites. All of our coal sites are using sort of mechanized coaling methods, the most modern kind of methods, and they're fairly productive for the standards of the time. And we hope that new technologies will significantly increase the yield of these coal sites. But we are, I imagine, probably for the remainder of this campaign, likely to be a net coal importer. What we really want to do is to reduce the amount that we're importing, partly because obviously that reduces, every time we import, that puts pressures on our private capital stock. But also at some point, we might be looking at an international shortage. What if there's a really significant war in Europe, between France and, Prussia or something like this that really disrupts coal supply? it's a concern. It is a concern. Or whether just international economies begin to outgrow coal supply, and there's a lag between the kind of the period where the demand outstrips global capacity for supply. So there's a real concern. So we want to have, like, we've got enough padding here to give us a few months worth of coal. If, for example, also the British decided to declare war on us, there's a complete blockade and we can't import any coal. Coal now powers everything. All of our railroads run on coal. A lot of our mechanized industrial plant runs on coal. A lot of our kind of agricultural sites also consume coal because there's some kind of machinery on site that burns coal. So our entire economy now, this is an absolute bottleneck resource. We have to make sure that we have it. That's pretty much it. There's nothing else to really do. Let's have a really quick look through our reports. So these are the open engagements from last turn. This is the beginning of the war, really. Just as a refresher, this is the engagement in Bosnia-Herzegovina outside Sarajevo. It's a big win. We inflict 50,000 casualties. Most of those, incidentally, look to be ranged casualties, which is interesting, or at least half of them. So we are definitely in a new era in terms of artillery. We sustained very light casualties, which is good to see. 2 national morale points for that. A further significant engagement at Sarajevo. The Austrians press this position. We lay waste to what looks like at least an entire army corps, perhaps a little bit more. That's what we're looking to do. We're looking to basically attrition Austrian forces. We want to be doing this, destroy army corps after army corps, continuously inflict these kind of defeats, and then create the kind of room, the elbow room for maneuver. But it has to be based on whittling Austrian forces down sufficiently to allow that. If we try and do that now, the Austrians could concentrate a large part of their army against one wing or one sort of axis of advance. We don't want that. We want to keep our forces in a configuration where they can support each other. That yielded really good results in the Second Austrian War, which you'll remember was touch and go. It was a defensive war, but it paid off. We inflicted hideous casualties. I mean, that was probably the most bloody war that we fought, I think. The casualties we inflicted on the Austrians were absolutely devastating. I think by the end of that war, which went on for a few years, they suffered something like nearly 1 million casualties. That's not 1 million dead necessarily, but it's 1 million casualties, which for the time is quite something. It hasn't ended the Austrians' appetite for conflict, however. A further engagement then in Sarajevo, 3 in total, an additional 40,000 casualties, just a shade under. And again, a HQ unit. This might be the remainder of a corps, so it might be that this, plus some of the elements from the previous engagement, actually represents the destruction of 2 army corps entirely destroyed. Good stuff. That's what we want to see. That's what we're here to do. That's pretty much it. Looking through the other reports, nothing else. We are sort of high summer, so we're expecting a period of good weather between now and sort of late September. So these are our sort of militia forces, our conscripts being gradually trained into line formations. It's good. No issues there. Good stuff. So you can see from here the numbers of units of coal. 25, that's 50, 61. It's like it's 100 units of coal nearly that we're importing, and we're doing this every fortnight. I mean, coal is cheap compared to things like luxury goods, and a lot of things are exporting. It's not very, very expensive, but increased rarity will drive up the price, which will make everything more expensive for us in terms of production. Yeah, good stuff. So, in the last fortnight, then I was just scouring through the kind of imports and exports. 33 units of goods sold to our colonies for a yield of 126. Merchandise is sold in the national market. Oh, this is the taxation, 1,800. That's nice. Exports also 1,800. So half of our private capital that comes from exports. 758 for imports. Okay, good stuff. No concerns there, nothing to worry about. I always tend to check, as a matter of course, treaties to reply in foreign ministry, just in case I listed in the reports. You can see from Abdulaziz, we're very much nearing the end of his reign now. Political crisis results in very low administration and also low diplomacy. It doesn't affect the army. The army's still relatively effective, but this means we have no income of diplomats. I have an idea about that, which I'm going to share with you. It kind of folds into another future plan that I have. That's it. In terms of our status then, prestige ranked 5th. I don't tend to really play, with prestige. You're not going to win as the Ottomans, but it's always worth keeping an eye out. Prussia is 6th. Yeah, Prussia's 6th with 18,000. We're 5th. Above us then is Russia at 23,000. Not far behind Russia. Interesting. I wonder if we overtook Russia in terms of prestige, whether that would impact how Russia behaves towards us. There's a good chance we're going to find that out, frankly, soon, because one of the ways we're going to get a lot of prestige is to be successful in the field, secure victory locations, and this kind of thing. So in the next few years, we're going to be clawing in quite a bit of prestige through battles and occupations and such. Right. That's it. I would say I'm going to put you on pause and pass turn, but that's a lie. I'm going to pass turn. Someone did ask in the comments about how long turns are. I think he said about 4 minutes or something like that. I don't really time it, but I guess we're going to find out. So if you're interested in how long turn times are, 15 years into a campaign, hit your stopwatch now. I'm not going to put you on pause. I'm going to pass turn, take a sip of drink, because in the UK, in late September, we have the most unbelievably sweltering heat wave, which I guess will be short-lived. Probably next week there'll be frost or something. But anyway, so yeah, save turn, pass turn, and I want to take a swig of my drink. Now, I have a bit of a plan for this campaign. I've not decided what course to take. There's a few options. One course, which is the course I had imagined I was going to take when I began in 1850, is to just keep playing this single Graham campaign right through to 1920, and whatever the weather, it's going to be played until 1920. We've had a stronger start than I had imagined. The Ottomans have had a very, very strong start. Our economy is a lot bigger, frankly, than even a lot of other great powers, just in terms of the number of factories we have and stuff like that. Our factories aren't necessarily as productive as their factories, but the AI has been quite sluggish in developing their own economies. That gives us a pretty big advantage in terms of the amount of tax revenue we claw in. That's allowed us to build a really large and a very effective army. And it's an army that's now very experienced. We've fought many wars with it in the last 75, 1850, last 25 years. The first war was a few years in against Russia, of course. At that time, we only really had the embryo of a kind of modern army. And at the time, I talked about, the kind of founding of the sort of, the modern Ottoman army and the kind of doing away with the old kind of Kappa Kulu and the Janissaries and this sort of thing. The game is locked into a little bit of a meta, which is a part of the fun of it. It's expected that when you kind of depart from the real course of history, that you have a kind of an alternative history. We have a very powerful Ottoman Empire. The meta is we go to war with Austria every few years. And the plan in this war was to try and militarily occupy huge swathes of the Austrian Empire and position ourselves so that we can basically dominate Austria, reduce them to being basically a minor power that is engaged in a kind of forever war, and to use that forever war as a lever to kind of create national morale. Whereas usually warfare kind of depresses national morale over a period of time, if we're in such a domineering position, we can sort of have that sort of Orwellian forever war serve the opposite purpose. We can conduct sorties, and as and when we please, to conduct or to take important locations and then leave when we want to. And leaving a place like Vienna or Prague doesn't result in a national morale loss, but taking them does result in a national morale gain. So there's that. That's the kind of plan, is to just continue the campaign as it is. The other plan is, we're in 1875 now. Once we get to 1879, one possibility could be is that we have a kind of an imagined crisis in 1879. It's not just, this crisis would be quite historically plausible. We wouldn't actually see the crisis, but we would live with the results of the crisis. The crisis would be, well, at the moment, in the Ottoman Empire, we have a political crisis. Abdulaziz is about to lose the throne. His nephew takes the throne for 9 months, and then ultimately Abdul Hamid takes the throne and he rules the Ottoman Empire for 30 years. During that time, you had, in 1877, the Ottoman-Russian War, where Russia takes Kars and Constanza, and you have the development of the Principality of Bulgaria and so on. And you have the kind of the Berlin Conference, really, which kind of ends that, and it agrees a new kind of, or it sets a new kind of a new Ottoman Empire. It resets the boundaries of the Ottoman Empire, and there's a kind of common agreement, among the kind of great powers. The Ottomans have very little sayings, as you can imagine. Now, we could kind of reproduce that crisis. The Ottoman Empire is much more powerful, but a lot of this economic growth, not mapped by the game, of course, would have been propelled by heavy borrowing from Western banks. And because the Ottoman state plays a central role in economic development, a lot of this is going to be a kind of state debt, So the idea being is that this political crisis could trigger an economic crisis, which again is not mapped by the game, which results in the insolvency of the Ottoman state. This in turn triggers an intervention of the great powers, to secure assets in the Ottoman Empire, to ensure the Ottoman state, one way or another, pays its debt. In the midst of this economic crisis, this political crisis, this kind of military crisis, of the Ottoman army begins to partially fragment. And the way that we reflect that is when we get to the end of this decade, we begin the 1880 campaign as the Ottoman Empire. It functions to kind of reset the campaign. And what we end up with, really, is a kind of an Ottoman Empire that is just coming out of a crisis. A crisis that we won't depict in the game. The crisis will happen in the background. It'll be happening in the background, and then in 1880, what we have is an Ottoman Empire with slightly reduced frontiers. Austria takes Kars and Constanza. The British have seized, for example, Aden. I think we keep Qatar, but the British have Dubai and so on. In the midst of this crisis, there's an independent principality in Bulgaria. And we're still playing the Ottoman Empire. We're still playing to 1920. But it's kind of, it resets the game. It re-anchors the game a little bit into real history. Now, again, I appreciate that part of the fun is a little bit of an alternate history. And we're definitely in the realms of alternate history now. We're playing the Ottoman Empire in the late 19th century. And we've taken Vienna multiple times. And we are definitely able to defeat Austria in a war. It's not guaranteed. As we learned from the last war, it can be touch and go. But anyway, this reset would deprive us of a couple of strengths that we have now. It's glutton for punishment stuff, but we would have to rebuild the Ottoman economy. The economic crisis would lay waste to the Ottoman economy. We would have to reconstruct the Ottoman economy after the Western banks, after this kind of crisis of sort of 1879. So we'd have to redevelop the Ottoman economy, sans some territories, like northern Bulgaria, which is quite important for a lot of our tobacco production. We'd have to reconstitute the Ottoman army. Now, the one thing that I'll give myself, because, it is glutton for punishment stuff, we're resetting the 1880 start date for the Ottomans is harder than the 1850 start date. The Ottoman Empire is definitely in a worse shape in 1880 than it was in 1850. So the one thing that I will do to give myself, because we will have Abdul Hamid on the throne, he will have not been on the throne for very long, so he will be at the beginning, really, of his kind of tenure as a sultan, is I'm going to try and mod the files to allow for diplomat income. Not big diplomat income, maybe like twice a year, I think once every 6 months, we should get one diplomat. This means that for the rest of the campaign, or for much of the campaign, we will have the option to reassert ourselves in areas that we've lost. So, for example, we will be able to reconquer Bulgaria at some point, which we would intend to do. We would look to kind of reacquire territory from Russia. So, for example, Kars, the territories that we lose as a result of the 79 crisis. And if we're brave enough, at some point make a play for places like Aden and the British territories that will kind of appear, if you like, in the kind of fringes of the Arabian Peninsula. So that's the kind of second option. That's the idea that I'm toying with. I would posit that is not just a likely thing that could happen. It's or a possible thing. It's the most likely thing. I think that an Ottoman Empire that develops this rapidly economically during this period, would have incurred significant debts. The Ottoman state would be at a point of kind of insolvency. I think they had a loan system actually mapped in the economics tab, which you sadly can't kind of see anymore. Or you can see it, but you can't. It's not playable. You can't use it. It's like the game was. They had begun developing the idea of loans and borrowing and stuff like that, but it wasn't completed. They bailed on it, and they just left some of the kind of interface so you can see what some of their plans were. But for example, in games like Victoria 3, which is not a bad game, the economic system is a little bit more fleshed out, and like yeah, it's very easy as the Ottoman Empire to get yourself into debt very, very quickly. And we could sort of pretend that that is exactly what's happened. It's a fairly likely scenario. And however powerful we are, if the great powers, the concert of powers, intervene all at once to secure Ottoman territory, you know, even if it's fringe territory to secure assets, nothing would be able to do about it. You know, like, so even if we were playing that crisis through, we would probably choose the option, which is to basically give up some territory, you know, to lose some territory, go through the crisis and sort of come out the other side and start again. So that's kind of what we'll be doing. Like that is what we'll be doing if we take the option, the 1880 option. We'll be starting again in 1880. I'm going to just quiet. I'm not sure if the music is really loud for you guys, but it's for me. So I'm going to quieten the music a little bit. There we go. So that's the 1880 plan. Anyway, as I say, I've not kind of completely, decided that's what I'm going to do. But I'm definitely toying with the idea. The other thing we could do is kind of something in between. Now you can't play the 1850 and the 1880 campaign. But what we could do is we've set ourselves a war goal in this war against Austria. It's 1875 now. What we could say is, if before either the fall of Abdul Aziz, which is like next year, I think it's 76, or say 1877, we could say if by late June 1877 we haven't taken Vienna and convincingly defeated the Austrians, we have to go with the 1880 option. We have to reset the campaign. That creates a little bit of pressure in this war, then, to actually, like, you know, if we manage to secure Vienna, we manage to get the military occupation that we want, which, to be clear, is pretty much everything east and south of the Danube. We have to control all of those tiles. We have an occupation force in place. If we kind of do that, you know, then, yeah, we can just carry on with the 1850 campaign, you know, where the Ottoman Empire is in a very strong position, and we really would then be playing a serious great power that has, you know, been restored to, like, you know, almost its kind of imperial apogee, at least in the Balkan Peninsula. So that creates a bit of pressure for this war. That's another option we could do. I should say as well that the benefit of the 1880 start is, for one, it alters the meta of the game. We're not going to be invaded lots of times, I don't think, because no powers have any claims in our territory. Russia, which has a hard claim on Kars and Eastern Anatolia, I don't think it has those claims anymore. That said, Russia still has a claim on Constantinople, so that's a moot point. But Austria wouldn't have a claim on Bosnia-Herzegovina, for example. Bosnia-Herzegovina, in the 1880 start, I think is already in a halfway house to Austria. It might be an independent state that functions as ostensibly a kind of a satellite. It resets the meta. All of the powers are at peace. The forever wars in Scandinavia end. So it kind of creates a convincing reset. The 1880 map is also quite pleasing to the eye. Now, the tiles are all pretty much the same, but little things like the Suez Canal are made visible and are labelled for you. The other really nice thing about the 1880 campaign, which benefits us in a long game, is that it completely opens up the map. So Africa's completely opened up, the Arabian Peninsula, and bear in mind that in our colonial suite, we don't have any of the kind of instrumentation necessary to actually explore the interior of the Arabian Peninsula. So that area will be like a forever terra incognita, which functions as a kind of, it serves to hamstring our consolidation of the Hejaz. So there are some real benefits of the 1880 reset. There's benefits in terms of playability. There's benefits in terms of long game prospects for the Ottoman Empire. There's benefits also in terms of, I mean, if you're following the campaign and you're seeing it as a, you know, as a conventional kind of YouTube sort of series, it re-adds a little bit of peril to the Ottoman Empire. The beginning of this campaign was a little bit touch and go. There'll be a lot more of that of the 1880 start, I think. It'll be touch and go again. We'll have to pick up where we left off. We'll have the same army commanders. We'll probably have to reconstruct our fleet. You could probably argue that maybe the fleet was decommissioned, or a large part of the ironclads were decommissioned or lost, or had to be sold because of kind of Ottoman state insolvency, sold or given over to the Western powers, you know. So that's again another option anyway. Yeah, I'll think about it. I haven't decided. You're welcome to kind of comment or make suggestions as to kind of what you'd prefer. I can't promise I'll do what you want, but I'll have a think about it. We've got a few years anyway. We're going to see over the next 12 months the fall of Abdelaziz. And yeah, kind of track that political crisis. I think it's very plausible. That political crisis could have snowballed into an economic one, a kind of cascading crisis of the Ottoman state in the late 1870s, which results in wholesale economic collapse, which incidentally will result in us having to rebuild most of our railroads. The only way that we could really seriously reason that is most of the Ottoman rolling stock is kind of given over as a result of the kind of Ottoman state debt. You know, the Ottoman economy is basically stripped bare. Like, huge amounts of industrial plant is owned by foreign industries, it's closed down. You know, so it's a complete economic crash. It's something that's kind of akin to what happened to America in the early 30s sort of thing, maybe even bigger. So it's like that. It's a kind of an economic collapse. We will be rebuilding the economy. That gives us a bit of an opportunity to kind of rebuild the economy in a slightly more balanced fashion as well. There's some advantages to that. It means that we won't necessarily repeat mistakes. And again, we're playing the same faction from 1850 to 1920. And whatever way the 1880 campaign goes, it will be played to the end, just as this one will, if we continue with this campaign. So anyway, food for thought. Have a think about it. I've kind of slightly crashed the game by minimizing the game whilst it was processing turn. And I'm not sure if this is going to actually be visible in the video. So even though I did suggest that you try and time the turn, I might actually put you on pause and we'll pick up once I've kind of resolved this issue. So I'll see you on the other side. Okay, welcome back then. I should say that I reckon turn times are a little longer than 4 minutes, because it's probably about 4 minutes that I pressed pause. Although there was a little bit of a kind of... That happens sometimes. If you minimize the game, it doesn't really crash, as long as you just keep clicking, you know, don't close program. Yeah, it sometimes kind of... it struggles. It has problems. So you just have to kind of leave it and wait for the turn to process. But anyway, let's look at some after action on that turn then. And a couple of sort of sizable engagements. The first one then is as expected. Where is he? So he looks like he's gone back. I think the reason for that is that Serbia's kind of technically neutral, even though it's kind of strange. Even though Belgrade is controlled by the Austrians, Serbia is kind of... We're not at war with Serbia, basically. And we're not in a military alliance with Serbia. So we conducted a localized offensive. That was okay. Second Army under Hussein Avni kind of fell back then to Niš. But it was a really successful engagement. 3 national morale points. We inflict 25,000 casualties. We take 4,000 casualties. A comfortable win in the bag, but it is very localized work. Again, Hussein Avni, the Second Army, falls back straight away. Now, the First Army... fell back from Bosnia, but he was caught in Bosnia before managing to get to Novi Pazar. Fairly sizable engagement then, with equal sized forces. His force in total, this includes garrison units, and the garrison in Sarajevo is pretty significant. You will recall from some months back that we turned Sarajevo into a pretty large kind of fortress. Like, expanding and modernizing fortresses alone isn't enough. You do have to build garrison forces and actually utilize that extra space and extra protection. If you just do it and keep the stock garrison units in, it won't really count for too much. So we fairly significantly expanded the garrison, the Sarajevo fortress. That provides also support to actions in the district, in addition to supporting actions from adjacent troops. I think in this case there were no supporting actions from adjacent troops. If you look at the elements that you can list, this is pretty much a standing army. 16 line infantry regiments, 8 guard, 4 heavy cavalry, 5 light cavalry. So this is pretty much our standing field command. 480 cannons. Anyway, it's a big win. It's heavy casualties for the Austrians again. Why that is, I mean, it might be the fact that I think Arthur von Bylund right, or something like that. I think he might be a 2-star. In any case, my hunch is that there's probably a significant command penalty there. Maybe not terribly good composition either. There's no cavalry there. Nothing in the way of kind of mobile elements to sort of provide support. So if his force breaks, it can be, large parts of it can easily be run down. Anyway, it was a breaking action. Even though it's a victory for us. The First Army falls back, and it was set actually to enter the depot in Novi Pazar anyway. This force has now taken some fairly substantial losses. My instinct here is to pull the First Army back even further and look to use our sort of central reserve to be able to switch out some of these forces. That said, they've not sustained massive casualties. It's mostly cohesion and organisation, and I think that is probably based on the fact that it's a long march, sort of interspliced with some fairly heavy action. So it's mostly cohesion and organisational loss. Probably pulling back further would be the smart move there. That's pretty much it. In terms of actions, that's it. It looks like we've got Austrian force scouting, pressing into kind of Bucharest. No action there, but that's interesting. All quiet on the Eastern Front, so to speak. No engagements in sort of... yeah, no engagements in kind of Wallachia or Moldavia. So it's a question of what do we do with this position. What I'll probably do here, because it'll be quite a long video anyway, and it'll be the first video in a couple of months, so I don't want to start off with a kind of an hour-long video necessarily, is to leave it here, have a think about this, have a think about also what to do with the campaign. They're the three options. Continue from 1850 all the way to 1920 with what we've got. Reset in 1880. We do that at the end of 1879. We reset. We play as the Ottomans. If we reset, it opens the map. The Suez Canal becomes visible. It allows for more colonial options because we haven't got to explore anything, and the Ottomans specifically lack exploration teams. They don't have that kind of, I suppose, the kind of frontiers mentality that a lot of colonial powers had. So that allows us to fully consolidate the Arabian Peninsula. We lose some territory. We lose Aden, which is a really valuable colony, but we don't necessarily lose it forever. It is a colony. Any war with any power, we can press for colonial possessions as a peace deal. I think we probably lose much of our positioning in the Horn of Africa. It's really the exterior, and we lose Qatar. Oh no, we lose Dubai, and I think the Trucial states. But we keep kind of Qatar. Probably as a halfway house, it might be like a protectorate as opposed to a colony. I think we keep Kuwait as well, although I'm not sure. I mean, the British did eventually muscle in on Kuwait. I'm not sure when they did that. But, the whole peninsula will be opened up. It allows us to properly consolidate the Hejaz. And we would switch the options again once we're a decade in to allow us to kind of begin to claim territory. Some territories we'll claim anyway. Like, for example, I think we lose Constanta. Romania becomes independent. And in the east, we lose Kars. Possibly Van as well. Possibly Batumi, I'm not sure. But the Russians basically get a part of eastern kind of Anatolia. It's not a really resource-rich region, but, you know, we'd lose access, for example, domestic access to tea. So we'd have to import it to sort of satisfy that demand. So yeah, anyway, food for thought. We could reset. In 1880, Italy is fully formed and considerably more powerful than it is in this campaign. Germany will have completely united. Yeah, so and a lot of the kind of scramble for Africa will be kind of underway. All this territory will be opened up. You can see so far France has successfully kind of taken control of areas that it did in real life. So yeah, and Japan will be on the road as a major power. That is the case, to be fair, with this campaign. But a reset might kind of... I'm not sure what a reset will do for Japan as a major power, whether it advantages them or not. But I think it re-anchors the game into the real world, creates peril for the Ottomans. But I'm not necessarily set on the idea. It's just that it's the best course of action. It's just an idea that would spice the campaign up a little bit. And again, the third option is to continue with 1850 and set ourselves a condition. If we want to continue with this campaign, we have to deliver a result in this war. We have to kind of like meet an objective. So we have to basically secure, say, everything south and east of Vienna, plus Vienna. That's pretty reasonable, you know, like, and obviously not including Italy. So Udine, for example, you know, that everything kind of east of that, I guess. Everything east of that, everything south of Vienna, and everything east of Vienna. If we secure those territories plus Vienna, you know, you could say that kind of that wins us the right to carry on as a really powerful Ottoman state, and that does transform the Ottoman Empire into something else. The 1880 reset is a cascading political, economic, and military collapse of the Ottoman state. But if I do the 1880 reset, I will kind of play with the files to get diplomat income, so we can make colonial plays. Just to reiterate. So that's it. I'm going to leave it there. We're in early July, then 1875. I think we'll pick up where we here, because I've not actually made any moves. So we're going to pick up in early July 1875 in the next video, which won't be like, it's not going to be a long time away. The multiplayer game's calmed down a bit now, so I can do more frequent uploads and this kind of thing. Yeah, thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.